Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we're taking on an absolute monster of a topic. Literally, we're diving headfirst into the world of BlackArch Linux. Now, if you're stepping into ethical hacking or penetration testing, you've definitely heard of it. It's the undisputed heavyweight champion of pen testing distros. And while it is an incredibly powerful platform, it comes with a really unique challenge: navigating its absolutely massive, sometimes intimidating, arsenal of tools. So let's just dive right in and make some sense of it all. Over 2,800 tools. Just let that sink in for a second. That is what you get when you boot up a fresh, full install of BlackArch. Now, having that kind of raw firepower at your fingertips is incredible, but honestly, the sheer volume is actually one of the biggest barriers for users. It's kind of like walking into the cockpit of a 747 where someone ripped all the labels off the buttons. BlackArch simply isn't a beginner-friendly playground. It's built for people who want total control and extreme depth. The real challenge you're going to face isn't finding a tool, it's knowing which ones actually matter. So here is our roadmap for today. First, the BlackArch overwhelm. Then, the tech latest setup shortcut. 3, mapping the attack surface. 4, exploitation and network breaches. 5, post-exploitation and forensics. And finally, mastering the core toolkit. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the BlackArch overwhelm, tool bloat and setup pain. Okay, so the absolute best way to conquer this tool overwhelm is to categorize a curated list of the top tools that real penetration testers and red teamers are actually out there using. Think of this whole process like a heist. First, you case the joint, right? That's step 1, recon. Then you pick the lock. That's step 2, exploitation. And finally, you clear the vault, which is step 3, post-exploitation. Organizing your mindset to follow this actual real-world hacking journey instantly cuts through all that noise. Moving right along to Section 2, the tech latest setup shortcut, skipping the grueling phase. Look, historically, adopting BlackArch meant manual installs, incredibly complex repositories, dependency conflicts, and just a ton of wasted time. It was this rite of passage that usually just resulted in a lot of coffee and crying. But the shortcut? The tech latest ready-to-use BlackArch virtual machine. It's fully configured and available instantly on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, and you just access it via VNC, which is simply a remote desktop connection. There's no manual installation, no conflicts. You literally just log in and start working. They even put together a completely free, curated YouTube playlist course to walk you through the whole thing. It's a total game changer because it lets you get straight to the actual learning. Which brings us to Section 3, mapping the attack surface, recon and web apps. You know the golden rule: you can't attack what you can't see. So we start our heist by casing the joint with top-tier recon tools. Nmap is the absolute backbone of almost every pen test. It sets your foundation with service and operating system detection. But if you're looking at a massive IP range and speed is your #1 priority, you've got to pivot to Masscan. Masscan is unparalleled. It can literally scan the entire internet in under 6 minutes. We've also got Amass for mapping out subdomains and theHarvester for pulling OSINT, open source intelligence, like employee emails. And then there's Netdiscover. This acts like a digital sonar on a local network using ARP. It simply sends out a signal asking, hey, who is at this IP address, to quickly find live hosts. Once you actually know what's out there, you're almost definitely going to hit a web application. And Burp Suite is the undeniable industry standard here. It is amazing. It lets you pause internet traffic right in midair to manipulate it, exposing logic flaws before the data ever even reaches the server. For quick, albeit pretty loud, early vulnerability discovery, you'd throw Nikto at it. Then you've got Gobuster and Dirsearch, which are both phenomenal for systematically guessing hidden directories using massive word lists. Finally, WhatWeb instantly identifies the underlying CMS, which are essentially the website's building blocks like WordPress, and it details the exact server technologies running under the hood. All right, Section 4, exploitation and network breaches, breaking the defenses. So, picking the lock usually means dealing with passwords. Hydra is your go-to fast online brute forcing tool. It's essentially like repeatedly guessing the password right at the front door, which, as you can imagine, is inherently loud and slow. But if you manage to steal the encrypted password hashes, you move offline. Hashcat is like stealing the lock itself, taking it back to your lab and firing up a supercomputer to crack it at millions of guesses per second. Alongside it, you have the absolute classic John the Ripper, Medusa for parallel login guessing, and Crunch, which generates highly customized word lists for when those default dictionaries just fail you. Moving beyond just passwords, we have to look at broader attack vectors. When we talk about exploitation frameworks, Metasploit isn't just a tool, it's a massive ecosystem covering everything from the initial breach all the way to post-exploitation. You've also got Searchsploit for offline exploit databases, Beef for browser-based attacks, Empire for Windows environments, and RouterSploit for embedded devices. On the wireless side of the house, Aircrack-ng gives you a complete Wi-Fi testing suite. Reaver targets WPS, which is that notoriously weak PIN system you see on a lot of routers. Wifite gives you quick automation. Kismet acts as this invisible wireless sniffer. And Bettercap provides a really modern framework for intercepting traffic and man-in-the-middle attacks. And now, Section 5, Post-Exploitation and Forensics, Deepening the Breach.
Okay, you're in the network. Now it's time to clear the vault. To escalate your privileges to full administrator control, you're going to rely on LinPAS for Linux and WinPAS for Windows. Then there's Mimikatz. This tool is legendary. It extracts passwords directly from a computer's memory. For navigating Active Directory, which is basically the digital address book and bouncer for corporate networks, Crack-Map Exec is your ultimate Swiss Army knife. And for dominating internal traffic, Wireshark analyzes the raw data while Responder actively poisons the network. It literally tricks computers into handing over their passwords when they get lost looking for a server.
Sometimes, deepening that breach requires taking a microscope to the files and the memory you've captured. Hydra is fascinating for this. It's a professional-grade reverse engineering tool that was actually developed by the NSA and later open-sourced to the public. You also have Yara for rule-based malware detection, and Volatility, which digs deep into RAM dumps. It essentially freezes a computer's short-term memory in time, so you can extract hidden secrets. Finally, platforms like Autopsy and SleuthKit allow for incredibly deep disk and file system analysis. Finally, Section 6, Mastering the Core Toolkit. Focus over volume. If you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer today, let it be this. Mastering even 20 to 30 of these tools is more than enough to conduct serious, professional-grade penetration tests. Success in ethical hacking is not about knowing all 2,800 tools in BlackArch. You do not need to memorize a mountain of software to be a phenomenal ethical hacker. It is entirely about deeply, confidently, and practically understanding a select few. Why is that the case? Because what matters most is understanding the underlying concepts. Installing a massive quantity of software on your machine doesn't make you a hacker. Understanding the workflows does. You need to understand the logic behind Reconnaissance, how to truly map an attack surface, the exact mechanics of how an exploit functions, and the workflows required for post-exploitation. The tools, they're merely the vehicles used to execute those concepts. And that brings us full circle. By skipping the brutal administrative headaches and using something like the TechLatest virtual machine, you reclaim hundreds of hours. Hours you can spend actually learning how to execute a breach. You remove the traditional pain of Arch Linux and get to focus 100% of your energy purely on mastering the execution of these essential hacking concepts. So you know how to easily get the environment running without the setup pain. You now have the curated top 50 list of what professionals actually use out there in the real world. The sheer volume of BlackArch doesn't have to be this intimidating monster anymore. So here's the real question. Which 20 tools are you going to choose to master first? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I can't wait to explore more fascinating topics with you next time.